So today we're talking about how we developed a CBE course. And so Mary and I are just going to have an honest conversation with you about our collaboration, our curiosity, and right there, right away is Mr. Colonel. And we'll tell you about his role. And there is a surprise from Crouton as well. So let's see, next slide. All right, so who are we? So we are the not so quite contrary Marys. We are the ones who designed and cultivated the CBE garden. And so I am Dr. Mary Sciaraffa. I'm a professor in child and family studies. And then we have,
I'm Mary Adams, and I'm one of the instructional designers with the Instructional Design Center.
so today, like I said, we're gonna, next slide. We're going to, some of the learning outcomes are that we're going to recognize how structured design supports transparency in competency-based education classes. We're going to identify strategies for assessing and supporting student mastery. We're also going to describe how collaboration and AI tools supported our course design for the competency-based education course. And then we're going to reflect on a lot of our mind shift thinking mindset shifts that we had. I keep looking to my right because Mary's to my right. So we're going to be honest about what were those mindset shifts that we had in order to design a CBE class, but then also to teach it. So the first thing we want to talk about is a traditional class versus a competency-based education class. And so a traditional class, really short and sweet, is that it's fixed timing. For the purposes of this, we were converting a 7-week online class into a CBE class. And so a traditional 7-week online class or a traditional 16-week in-person class is fixed timing. You know, you have your weekly assignments, and then you have your due date. If there's some variable learning going on, some students might get the SLOs, some might not, but we're moving on to module 2 or whatever we need to do, right? Then the next topic in class. A competency-based education class is more flexible timing. And what we're looking for is looking for consistent mastery. And so what we want is we want to focus on the outcomes, and we're gonna dig deeper into that. And we want to focus on transparency with what we're looking for the students, what those expectations are, and then also flexibility. And so one of the things that, and I'll bring this up in a little while, but one of the things that the students got really excited about was it being self-paced. So we'll talk about what that means for us and for the students. So we weren't sure if you were familiar with the competency-based education, so I just want to explain it as if you're walking through the Karloftis garden. So you see Mr. Colonel there. He's starting his journey through the Karloftis garden. And so what's going to happen in a CBE class is we will ask Mr. Colonel to take an initial assessment. And this initial assessment is going to determine the path that he takes through the garden. And so let's say that he takes the initial assessment, he does really well with whatever the mastery threshold was that we set. And so he demonstrates that he has mastered many of the outcomes. And so we're just going to let him go ahead and go straight to the final assessment. So he'll take the red path, go straight to the final assessment. Let's say that he didn't do so well. And so there was a couple of areas that he needed to strengthen. So he might take the blue path or the purple path. So which means that he would have to complete specific assignments depending on what the student needed to practice. And then they would do those assignments and then move on to the final assessment.
All right, so Mary was talking about what is a CBE format. And when we initially were designing this course, we had just previously designed this course as a traditional one. And our mentality right from the bat was, oh my goodness, this is going to be so easy. We'll be able to just shift a couple of assignments around, shift some timing around, and we'll be able to copy, paste, click a couple buttons and roll on. And we quickly, as we said, one of our objectives, we realized that's not necessarily going to be the case. There's a significant amount of mind shift changes that happen throughout that process. And the cool thing, and I guess it was also kind of gave the traditional format that we had designed the stamp of approval, because Dr. Sciaraffa had done a really great job of designing authentic assessments. And not that there's anything wrong with multiple choice, those definitely have their place in a course, but a significant amount of her assessments in the traditional course required instructor feedback, required kind of student progression. It was product based. And so kind of right off the bat, the first unanswered question that we ran into was, okay, what's going to be our initial assessment at the beginning of a module that students are going to do that's going to kind of send them down one of those pathways, whether they know this in material, they can go right to the final assessment of this module, or they need a little practice. And kind of the essence of CBE is that students can move through it. Like Dr. Sciaraffa said, they were super excited about self-paced. And so if they wanted to like get it done in a couple weeks, so be it. Well, we were running into a lot of those questions of bottlenecks and stops and all of that. So we ran into what are going to be the true core objectives of this? What are we going to use as our assessments? And then how did we want this to structure? What did it need to look like in Canvas that would give students the most, the best experience, the best learning experience, but also from a faculty perspective, make it really easy at a snapshot to see where students are along the path, because they're going to be at all at their different timing. And then also, do we really understand CBE? That's kind of what we asked ourselves as we began. It was like, wait a minute, I think we need to take a step back and look at our traditional designed course. And instead of trying, the idea of making a square peg fit, or whatever that is, trying to make that work, we needed to really redesign things and have CBE at the forefront of our mind and not an afterthought. And that's kind of, again, where these scattered seeds, we were like, we're a little scattered here. We need to get it together.
Yeah, because we thought it was so straightforward. We thought, they take the initial assessment and then they move on. They either do path A, path B, or path C. And we were like, we got this. And then we realized, wait, maybe we don't have this.
And so that is our aha moment.
Right,
we were like, okay, this is about the design of the course. It was nothing about the objectives that the traditional course was written around. It was nothing about the actual assessments. It was the design component of the course. And so we really had to start, at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And we had to kind of really think about backward design. And we had to do the whole process all over again. So it wasn't that quick copy and paste action. And that was our aha moment where we're like, okay, we need to dig back into it and implement backward design, starting with our objectives or outcomes. What are they going to do? How are we going to know that they've met that via the assessments? And then how are we going to get them there via practice, the activities, and what learning materials do they need, regardless of what path they find themselves on? So we started at the beginning with backward design, and that really helped us kind of shift everything. And I think create the best garden for our students, if you will, the best product, by really having that shift. Okay, so with backward design, I kind of alluded to this already, but you begin with the end. So what we're going to be, the last day of class, they shut their laptop at the end of the 7 weeks. What did we want them to be competent with? What student-led learning objectives did we want them to have accomplished and accomplished well, to be masters of? And again, because with CBE, you have the idea it is centered around mastery. So not only can they do these things, they need to do these things well, because we've given them several opportunities for their own paths of learning. And then we kind of looked at the outcomes for this class and realized, we were designing it towards some professional standards, and those can be kind of really all-encompassing. So we decided to deconstruct the traditional classes, SLOs, and be a little more focused so that assignments could truly align and students would know exactly what Dr. Sciaraffa was looking for when she graded. And instead of a Unit 1 exam being all these things, it was going to be this product is looking for these things. And again, we prioritize those in scaffold, which were going to be the most important, the most weight for the class, and then kind of use Bloom's taxonomy and the revised versions too of have we hit all of the kind of levels of understanding, and which of these outcomes fit more in the recall world, and what assessments would fit best for those, which of our outcomes are really application based, a little higher order thinking, and they may come later in the course and they need to have more weight and more practice opportunities for them. So we kind of started with step one and looked at the outcomes and then redesigned the entire course. And I think at one point I even said, I wish we'd had a whole new Canvas shell because we had things all over the place. And that really did help us.
So with this, we had to really think about, again, our mind shift and really start to ask ourselves, are all the outcomes, the student learning outcomes as they were written, are they all equal? And so when we were thinking about a traditional class, we were creating the course map and we're like, all right, great, covered that SLO, covered that, how does that align with the assignment and the assessment? But when we're thinking about mastery, and if students are mastering these competencies, and in our field, in child and family studies, we do have a professional organization, as many of you do, and they have professional standards. We really had to think about, are all the SLOs for this course, are they created equal? Or did we want students to be able to have more practice and demonstrate mastery with one skill over another? We also had to think about scaffolding. Did they need to have one SLO before they can, and master that skill before they can move on to mastering the next skill? And so we had to think about which ones, if there were ones that were higher level, and how did we want students to demonstrate that mastery? And we also had to think about how to utilize those outcomes to really enhance the student's experience. Because what does mastery look like, and what then do we want the students to experience? And we also had to think about, I know we'll talk about this in a little while, but in a competency-based education class, students are working on their own. And so there's not this idea of you have a discussion board and you're interacting with one another. We talked about them doing some peer, in the traditional class, they create lesson plans and then they have peer reviews. So, we thought, well, we can't do that in a CBE because if everybody's working at different levels and some are further along than others, it's hard to do that. So we had to then have that mind shift change of how are we going to organize this course? Are we going to organize it around a topic? Like in traditional classes, we tend to organize the module around a topic. Are we going to organize it around a specific SLO? And if so, which one comes first? Are we going to align those, or are we going to organize it around the competencies that the profession says that all professionals need? And so in our minds, again, that mind shift change, we had that 7 modules in mind, and we kept trying to fit everything into the 7 modules because it was a 7-week online class. But then we just figured we can't do that, right? And so we ended up with 10 modules. And again, we had to help students start to understand that it's not one module a week, that you have to, once you complete it, you can move on. And so, so then we really thought long and hard about organizing those modules. And this is when we asked Bruce, who is Mary's ChatGPT friend, and my ChatGPT friend is Sage. And we really asked them to help us with this, and what would it look like, and what would, these are the activities that we had. And again, we had to tweak a lot of the activities and assessments to think about not just, we already have this, how does this fit in there? We had to really be mindful about what is it that we want students to have experience with and show us that they know.
I think the prompt I gave Bruce specifically was, okay, we're really close to this being CBE, but help us organize this, the schedule in a CBE-esque way. And that kind of, again, we didn't rely on that just totally, but
Right.
it drove our conversation significantly as we were talking about organizing it.
I do want to have a disclaimer that Mary and I both have the free version.
Oh, yeah.
So, so we are not asking anybody to get the fancy.
No, goodness, no.
We did this all with the free ChatGPT version. So there were times when we ran out of data.
Yeah, I had to wait the next day to ask Bruce another question, but that's okay.
It gave us time to reflect.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
All right. So, as we were thinking about the modules and the standards and what was it that we wanted students to do, we also had to think about grading. And so in traditional classes, we tend to have cumulative grading. But in a CBE class, it's more of a standard specific mastery. We really want them to demonstrate that they have the knowledge and can do it. They can demonstrate it for you. And so, again, thinking about how are they going to demonstrate their mastery? So what are the different types of assessments? And then we had to think about not just using the traditional assessments. And as Mary said, designing more authentic, flexible assignment. And so what we did was we had some initial practice assessments. So we took the publishers, kind
of textbook chapter
quizzes
and
and
use
then
that.
right. And so then we like dumped all of them in there and then they had to, and it was worth no points. So it was really just to see how much knowledge they had. And then we would use some of those questions, randomly choose some of those questions at the end. And so that helped us really start to look at, and again, the course has ended now, so I've gone back and throughout the course, I was able to go and see, what did they score in the initial? What did they score at the end? Did their learning improve? And so we had to think about that, but we also had to think about those mastery thresholds. So in that initial assessment, which again, I said was no points, we had that mind shift, had to think, oh my God, we're asking students to do something, but they don't get any points from it. So like, what's the motivation? And it was, for them to then be sorted into one of the paths. And so we had to think about, so what was that threshold for them to be sorted into the path? And then what were those practice assignments we were going to ask them to do within the path? And so the mind shift change was shifting from cumulative grades to more of a standard specific, and really thinking long and hard about what are we asking them to do and what are those skills that we really want them to demonstrate and that knowledge that we really want them to demonstrate. So then it was going back to that. So what does mastery look like in the course in the field? And I just kept asking myself, and this is a 500 level class, so I kept asking myself, when the students graduate, what do I want them to do? When they're out in their work world, in their careers, what do I want them to be able to do? And so then it was, how do I ask them to demonstrate that mastery for us? And so once we figured out we developed those practice assessments. That's a lot. We then, as I mentioned before, we had to set those mastery thresholds. So what did it look like in that initial assessment? But then also when we were asking them to do it at the end, what does it look like? And what was that mastery threshold? And so we talked to people who had completed CBE classes. We talked to other people who were more familiar with CBE. And some people said, well, it's 80%. Some people said it's 70%, and we had to think about that. What would we want it to be? And then if they didn't meet that mastery threshold, so if they didn't meet, we had said 80%. If they didn't meet the 80%, then what does it look like for them to move on? Right? So if they didn't meet the 80% in the final assessment, which we actually had two, then what would reassessment look like? And how could how much time, if it was just an exam based, how much time were we giving them to take the exam again? So for example, I had one student who made below the threshold, and then he emailed me and he said, okay, reset it, I'm ready to take it again. And it was like within an hour. And I'm like, no, this isn't how it works. Like, and so, but Mary and I had to think about that prior to the students having that experience. And so, luckily we had talked through it and we said, you have to go back and do XYZ assignment, and then the quiz will open up again for you, or the exam will open up again for you. But, so that's something to think about. Are you just going to let students take that final assessment over and over and over? And how many times are you going to let them take it over and over? If they don't meet that mastery threshold that you set. So again, we also had to think about pacing, and because like I said, we had 2 final assessments. One was an assignment, and the other one was an exam. And so we were thinking about bottlenecking, because students have to wait for me, the instructor, to grade it before they know if they've met mastery or not, and then they can move on to the next module. So how Mary and I, what we thought about, and again, we asked AI, and we had lots of questions, and AI gave us questions, asked us questions, but we had to think about, so we had 2 final assessments, and we set it up this way on purpose. One was an assignment, and then the other one was an exam. And if they made 80% on the exam, then they can move on to the next module. And then they weren't waiting for me to grade the assignment. So was one of the, again, mind shifts that we had to think about. Not all the modules were open. They had to demonstrate mastery before they can move on.
And the cool thing about CBE is, because of the nature of, your course, as you're designing that, you can kind of pick and choose what that looks like via the whole course or per module, or again, like you said, they're not all weighted equal. They're not all, the outcomes are going to be equal. So that can shift. Again, it doesn't have to be rinse and repeat each module, but for this class, it did make sense because it was a lot of product based,
right?
But we were trying to avoid those bottlenecks too. So that it did work really well as far as the design aspect.
Yeah, and thinking about, and again, that was one of our mind shift change, was thinking about those bottlenecks. And so the other thing was this idea of rubrics, because students are waiting for you as the instructor to give them that feedback before they can move on. And so again, using AI to really link the rubrics to the learning outcome and to the specific skills that we wanted the students to demonstrate, so that when I graded it, they would get that specific feedback of what they were doing in the practice assignments, what they were doing really well, or what they needed more experience with, more practice with. And so it was really important to enhance that feedback, because then in those practice assignments, then they knew exactly where the areas that they needed to strengthen, so that when they got their final assignment, they hopefully would have gone back to look at the resources and look at the areas that they needed more practice with. So it was really important to give that authentic feedback, but also efficient feedback, because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just that Cinderella date of Sunday night at 11:59, right? Students were turning in stuff all during the week, all different times. And so I had to, thank goodness Canvas has that little thing on the right-hand side that says this was turned in. And so I was, and I had told them that it would be 3 days, 72 hours is what I gave myself to grade assignments and give them feedback. And so that's really important in a CBE class as an instructor. And again, a mind shift. I'm not waiting until Monday morning to grade everything or, the whole next week, because I know sometimes in some of the traditional classes, they turn it in on Sunday, and then we give ourselves till next Sunday to grade it. But this is, you're constantly looking at when stuff is turned in and who's turning it in when, and somebody might be on module 1 and somebody might be on module 3, and you're grading things, different assignments at different times. So we felt like the rubrics needed to be very clear. So 1, students knew exactly what the expectations were, and 2, when I gave them that feedback, the rubric feedback, but coupled with my authentic feedback, then that helped them start to understand what they needed to work on.
We had some really good questions in the chat, so I was
Yeah.
responding to that. And I'll talk where I've clicked off my screen there, sorry. So I'll talk a little bit about that as far as like designing it within Canvas, because again, it all centered around, for this CBE class to work well, how we used Canvas to its full potential for student experience, faculty experience, and again, for Canvas to operate the way that we wanted the CBE component to operate. So, starting again, using backwards design, you start with your outcomes. And so in Canvas, what that looks like is, and I'll think I have a screen here.
Yeah.
So what that looks like is going to the outcomes portion in Canvas and manually putting those in there. And you have a couple of different options with how you want that to look. You can group them. And then the cool thing is, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all for each of those outcomes. We had conversations about, okay, outcome knowledge of that CLL1, knowledge of foundation of early childhood education. Okay, that's going to be a recall kind of setup. They may apply that with theory and things later on in their lesson plans, but that particular standard's going to be lower level Bloom's taxonomy. They're going to show it by recall. So what would be the end assessment that's going to show mastery of that? So again, implementing that backwards design, there's the outcome. Now what's the assessment to show mastery? Within that conversation, what does mastery look like on that assessment? What's the number? What's the percentage? What's the product? All those things. And now I've got to go in as the designer in Canvas alongside the faculty. How can I make Canvas do that? So for each outcome, you can say, how do you want it to grade that outcome? Every time I put that outcome on a rubric, how do I want Canvas to calculate it? Is it going to be a running average? Is it going to be a decaying average? Which means, so if this concept was something that they were introduced to module 1, but they need to implement it throughout the entire course, do I want that to start weighing more at the end than at the beginning? Do I want to just take their highest product? If that showed up on numerous rubrics and they did awesome on module 7, but stunk it up a couple of other places or whatever, do I take that module 7? They showed it that one time, is that good enough? And again, it just depends on your course, it depends on your outcome, it depends on your product, how you would want that to grade. So Canvas, as you're setting up your outcomes, you can say, I would like it to grade this outcome XYZ. So we had numerous conversations about that. And again, we used Bruce and Sage to kind of bounce ideas back and forth. I asked numerous times, what would this look like in the grade book if we did this? What would this look like from a student perspective if we did XYZ? Because this was also my first CBE from a designer standpoint. So I wanted to make sure I didn't lead us astray with the Canvas component and she get in the middle of the class and it be a hot mess express, if you will. So we really thought about that, I know, at length with the design element for how we wanted it to grade. And then I think this is when I utilized that prompt into AI, uploaded our syllabus, uploaded our student guide, uploaded our the schedule, and said, I feel like we're so close. I feel like we are really close to CBE. Can you evaluate, if you were evaluating this course on how well it implemented CBE components, what would be your feedback? And that's when we started talking about, and I feel like Bruce was like, you've done a great job. You know how it'll talk back to you. You've done a great job designing this course to be truly CBE-esque, and gave us a couple of things to really think about, which was neat. And then we also had the conversation, did we want to utilize the traditional grade book, which is probably what you're used to. You know, it shows this top part of the screen. So there's our different modules and there's the grades or whatever, versus the mastery grade book. And the way we set up this course was, it did do kind of averages at times, but each module was, or each outcome competency was 10% of an overall grade. And then these 2 final assessments went into that average. And they had to get 80% or above because they did have the opportunity for reassessment.
Right,
So,
and I
go
wanted
ahead.
to talk about reassessment because we had to think about that as
Mhm.
well. So what if I made 80%? And so I got to move on. Did I get the opportunity to reassess to make 90% or 100%? Because I have another student who made 60%, but they got a chance. And so what if they redid and got 90%? So we had to think about that as well. Not that students would know each other's grades, but do we want students to be able to reassess as many times as they want to try to get to 100?
Mhm.
We finally just said no,
No.
like if they make 80%, that's it, we're moving on. Because then, there's going to be some students who are just going to try to reassess and reassess
Point
until
chasers, kind of thing.
until they get 100%.
And because they did get to
Which are Mary and I.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we
I'm
had
a
to
point
sit-
chaser
we
for sure.
really struggled with that. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? Because, I would want the chance to reassess.
Right.
So,
I got a 96, but I can get 100.
I
Yeah.
would,
So,
yeah.
and the idea with CBE grades is, we also talked about, do they have to master every competency
Right.
to pass the course? Because they get to move at their own pace. They get the opportunity to reassess with some safeguards in place that protect the faculty and help the student actually learn the material and not just rinse and repeat. Oh, reset it. None of that. And so was it going to be you got an A, B, or F? Because B would be that 80% or above was met mastery for us. And so are there no C's and D's? Again, we had to talk about all those things, and it can look like a million and one things, just like traditional classes can look like a million and one things. And
that was why we landed on the percentage
Mhm.
rather than the other meets mastery, because we felt like at the end, I had to submit grades to EKU. And so what is that going to look like? And
Right.
so if it's just meets mastery, does that mean that they get an A? Or if it's proficient, does that mean B? I think just for ease, we said, let's just go with percentage. And then that way
It'll translate.
It'll translate it for me in Canvas.
But we did utilize the mastery gradebook
Yes.
as a visual reference for students. So they had their traditional gradebook where they could see numerically how they were in the class. Again, so they knew, do I have an A, B, wherever. But they also had the mastery gradebook as a visual. It's color coded. It's really nice. And it also, at a snapshot glance, you can go in that gradebook, and if you see a bunch of oranges for one learning objective, you're like, that gives you pause to think, is it the assessment? Is it the learning material? Something about that particular learning objective is not going well holistically for the class, and it kind of, do you get the bell shape, whatever the visual? So it's a nice snapshot for faculty too. I put this visual on there because I just wanted you all to see when you put an outcome on a rubric, this is what it looks like for students. And you have a couple of different ways on how you can visually show it to students. We did this method. So one of their projects was a job interview. And then we had the rubric also had kind of for Dr. Scruffer to be able to click through and give specific feedback. But this particular rubric line is what read to the mastery gradebook. And so this was the one outcome that we were looking at holistically for this product, this final assessment, for that assessment project is what I was trying to say. And wherever they fail holistically on that is what read to that mastery gradebook. But then there was also a numeric score given.
Right. So this line had no points attached to it.
No, it would just be the color code visual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, so again, we've talked a lot about that shift. We're both point chasers. We like the gold star. I want the credit for what I'm doing. And so when we were deciding how to organize the class, how do we give transparency to students? And how do we do all that and differentiate what do they need to know for mastery versus what's nice to know?
Yes.
And we really, really spent a lot of time talking about that. So it was digestible for students. Again, it's self-paced. And she'd already talked about, we shifted away from discussion boards to new formatting of things because they are kind of, you're going to lose a little bit of that learner to learner interaction with the CBE, but how do you still enhance the other, like learner to content or learner to instructor interaction to make up for not having the learner to learner? And you can put some optional things in there. again, so it wouldn't matter where they fell as far as time wise, but it wasn't going to be that embedded learner to learner. So we did have to shift a little bit from traditional activities. Again, we couldn't just recycle. There was a lot of redesign on your practice activities, quite a bit.
Yes, and there was a lot of, having taught the course, there was a lot of interaction between student and the instructor. I did a lot of, not just feedback, but in Canvas, I don't know if you know this, but in Canvas, students can respond to your feedback. And so
Like
they would respond, it's like you're not, so they would respond to the feedback that, and so we would be having this conversation in that. So yeah, it was a shift away from
kind of
student to student.
Instead of just, I don't know, I don't want to use the word just, you kind of become a coach of the content alongside them, which you may not be able to do in a traditional format where everybody's at the same point throughout. And again, we really talked about that with your rubrics, how to set that up so you could give that type of, individualized feedback along the way.
Yeah.
Okay,
so yeah, you already talked about this.
I was going to say, I've kind of already talked about Bruce and Sage quite a bit. We utilized a lot of prompts to help us with that. And I wanted to show you how the pathways would look in Canvas.
Yep.
Depending on, because I had a couple of people in chat ask, like, how do you set all that up? How does that look? Can you make them bounce back to the optional activities? And you can. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that in Canvas. And this is one of the prompts I used quite a bit with Bruce alongside Canvas, like instructor guides. So I would ask, AI, ChatGPT, I would like this module to look like this. Can you help me make sure that I've set this up correctly? And of course, he can't see I still am personifying Bruce, my ChatGPT friend. Can't see the Canvas course, but I could give the way I set it up and ask that feedback back and forth. I also use Canvas support quite a bit and the instructor guides to make sure. So if you look there, you've got module 1 overview. That's kind of the intro page where we tell students what they were going to be learning for that module. And then that initial competency check was Dr. Sciaraffa's initial assessment. So this is going to be the sorting activity that's going to say you're either going to go path A, path B, or so forth. And this particular module only had 2 paths. Some had 3, just depending on the nature of it. And this is the one where we had said, okay, 80% or above, you can see is the threshold. And how do I know that? If you look at our second task list, it will only show if they got 0 to 80%. So that you can set different things in there using mastery paths in Canvas. And that could be, that would be a whole separate workshop because it's pretty in depth, but once you figure out how to use it, it's very nice for individualizing your courses and your modules because you can unlock, I'll use air quotes there, unlock certain assignments or pages in your module based on how students interact with a current or an earlier aspect of the module. So either they have to view something before something else unlocks, they have to submit, or they have to score a certain amount before multiple things can show. So we set this up, and you can see the students didn't necessarily see what pathway they were on because that Cadet A was really for faculty only because it's not published. But that way, if Dr. Sciaraffa looked at this module, she would see, okay, that's the reading resources and the activities for those that scored above 80 and so forth. So that's what it looks like once you kind of scaffold it and create your pathways in Canvas for after your initial assessment. And then again, here shows the bottom. There's the Cadet B pathway. And really they only had they got all the same learning material, but there was additional material and additional practices for those that scored beneath the threshold. And that's what it will look like.
Yeah. And I wanted to point out, you'll see 0 points there. And again, that was a mind shift. Like, they're not getting points for this. It's really practice. And so, so it's thinking about how do we motivate them to do it, right? Because, and the motivation is they can't move on, and to that final competency check until they complete the assignments. And then on those assignments, they need to make 80% or above, 80% or above competency that they met it. And so again, they were waiting for me to grade that, to give them that feedback and those rubrics and things like that for them to move on, for them to understand where they needed to go back and practice those skills. And so the motivation factor comes in a little bit here.
when we were having the conversation. Oh, and Cameo by Crouton.
There's Crouton. So if you don't know, Crouton, the squirrel, is the library's mascot. And so he was the inspiration, or they were the inspiration for Mr.
Mr.
Colonel.
Colonel. And we kind of, we were at a different training together, and we were talking about this course. And then the idea of sorting, a sorting hat, we joked that initial assessment's kind of like the Harry Potter, if you will, sorting hat that's going to put them in a house down a pathway. And we didn't want someone to be like, oh no, I'm Hufflepuff, you know, whatever. I didn't do well on this assessment. I want a Gryffindor. So we were like, how can we, and we also didn't want to timestamp it. Like, what if they didn't like Harry Potter? You know, we didn't want to have to put it in a certain category. So, how could we still motivate them? And again, they're all at their own pace. They've lost this learner-learner interaction a little bit. So how are they engaged? How can I have instructor voice when maybe it is an automatic feedback assignment or something like that? And thus birthed Mr. Colonel. And I don't really know like where he came from totally, but it was somewhere between Harry Potter and Crouton. Came Mr. Colonel. I don't know exactly where that came. And we had talked about badges, but there's not necessarily the best free version of badges in Canvas for our use at EKU. So we found that having kind of a course sidekick or a course companion was going to be our way of student engagement. And this class is early childhood education, so it just naturally fit the flow of things. So he somewhat became the instructor presence. And became kind of the mascot, and his voice is sprinkled throughout the course. And we kind of played on, you know, he's alongside them. He's also in the early childhood pathway, so he's wanting his own classroom. So he's got his backpack. He'll have, and one visual he has the course text. He's actually holding the course textbook for the course. And but we also use
he's sitting on the floor reading to children.
Yeah, he's reading to children at some point. And really use the idea of also this like military-esque, like you're on a mission, you've got to do it, you know. And so Dr. Sciaraffa became kind of the mysterious person behind Mr. Colonel, giving instructions for things. Just kind of fun.
So we did build in checkpoints, which was really important. And I think I got that. I definitely got that from Gil with the checkpoints and really making sure students are on self-pace and where they're supposed to be and what they need to do. And so Mr. Colonel was the one who stopped them and said, wait, let's check. Yeah, it's a current checkpoint. Let's see where you're at. Let's see what you're doing. And then he said, okay, now your mission from here on is XYZ.
Yeah.
And Mary used AI for that.
Oh, yes, totally. I could never just illustrate something as beautiful as Mr. Colonel. And so I did use a couple of different programs to kind of draft him as a true course companion. And so he was, I used, let's see.
Yes, yes. He was a non-player character, definitely.
Yes, yes. And so I used ChatGPT to create him alongside Napkin, and Pixely was another that I wanted him to do some different things. And then Adobe, I would just take his arm and then move it in different positions to hold books and things. So I felt like a graphic designer by the end of it. I was like, wow, I've animated this whole guy. But I really once I saw because we made a toddler version of Mr. Colonel.
Yeah.
And once I saw that, I kind of went crazy with him and just developed a whole little world. But it was fun. And I do hope that it increased student engagement along the way.
I think it did. And let's talk about student success. So we had the traditional class that Mary had mentioned that we completely redesigned together. And then we were working on the CBE class version of that class. And so we had to think about who did we want in the class. And so we decided that we were going to invite students to be part of the class. So like I said, it's a 500 level class. It was just for the students who are getting their degree online through our Child and Family Studies program. And I had several of these students before. So I knew when I looked at the roster, I knew which ones worked ahead. I knew which ones were self-motivated. But I did create a Google student survey, and I sent it out to everybody who was on the roster for the regular class. And what we had decided to do was we had decided to offer the CBE class in conjunction with the 7 weeks of the traditional class. And the thought behind that was, if the students felt uncomfortable within the first week of the CBE class, then they could jump back into the traditional class. And so I made that very clear to the students, but I did give them a drop dead deadline for them to jump back into the traditional class. So some of the myths were the students were very excited and said, oh yes, I do want a self-paced class. And it was like, well, it is self-paced, but, and I will tell you this, that Mary and I did build in those checkpoints, and but they were supposed to, and the automatic announcements were going out, and so like 3 weeks into the 4 weeks into the class, they were like still in module 2, and so it was, again, I had to like keep motivating them because they thought it's self-paced, but it was. So, and we did build in to each of the module, a reflection and a
Feedback.
yeah. And so at the very end, someone said, I wish there was due dates. And
So maybe CBE is not the best fit for that student if they need.
Or maybe,
Or
maybe you think about,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
you do have some due dates. Maybe they're soft due dates, but we did create a guide and we'll show you that. But we did, in module 0, we did, try to explain exactly what is CBE because students didn't understand. When they did the survey, if it said, I still, there was a part that said, I still have more questions, and students would put some questions in there. So I would email that student individually to answer their questions and to send them the guide. You want to show the guide is next if you want to.
Sure.
So Mary and Bruce had created this student guide and course map to explain what exactly CBE was. Again, I went back to AI and I gave it this guide to Sage, and said, I need a TLDR. So too long, didn't read. I need something that's quick and easy. So we did have like a chart that said, this is what is a CBE, this is what's traditional, so that students can then look at it and see. You can go to the next one.
Oh, sure.
Again, we really want it to be very transparent with the students and help them start to understand that there are things that are required, there are things that weren't required, but it was recommended that they do in order to be successful. It just giving them those skills and that practice to be successful with the final assessment. And so again, I think that was students kind of struggled with that. Some students were like, well, I didn't have to do it. So why can't I just retake that final exam 3 times, that final module exam 3 times? So I really liked that Mary and Bruce had come up with this to really think about being transparent and helping students really think about what was it, did it count, did it not count, and what they needed to do.
And we utilize this in the Canvas course too. So all those icons, every time they saw a learning activity, hopefully then they would be like, okay, that's recommended, but if I want to reassess, got to do it. So we use those icons throughout to kind of differentiate optional or not.
Yes. All right, so what came of this? Well, Mary and I became best friends.
And Marys collided.
And Marys collided. And so, yeah, I think it was very important to have the instructional designer and the subject matter expert really, really working together, really having that communication. We were very open. We did feel very safe with one another and saying, I don't know what CBE is. I thought I did.
I don't know if this is going to look in the grade book. Let me dive into that.
And, and there was times when Mary would say, this is a great activity. She's very nurturing. This is a great activity. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But is it really demonstrating mastery? And I'd be like, oh, but I love this assignment. And she'd say, well, but is it really meeting the goal of what we need to do? And so it really is important to have that communication, to have that safe space, to have those solution-focused dialogue. And that's, I had to come to that. It was nice to know I wanted to give it to them, but that's not what they, it wasn't meeting the goals of the class and what we needed for a CBE class.
And we did use Bruce and Sage quite a bit, but I do want to emphasize, we both want to emphasize that was not a replacement, because you can't replace the experience. You can't replace the dialogue that we shared and the reflection we had, but it was a great sounding board and kind of a good thing to say, what will this look like? That was helpful to have.
And the ChatGPT rubric generator. I love the rubric generator because, I would spend forever on rubrics, but you could give it the assignment and it will generate the rubric. And of course, you can change the rubric how you want.
Just a good starting point for
Yeah.
sure in a lot of ways.
I think it was just a pain to load them all into Canvas because you had to like copy
Oh
and
yeah,
paste.
a little bit of that fun.
All right, so those Mr. Colonel and Crouton. I know we're getting close to the end of time, but I think the students, they were really clear. Once we explained it to them and really talked to them about it, they really enjoyed it. They liked the idea of moving through the mastery. I think especially when they figured out that they could bypass the assignments because they met the 80% and go straight to it. I think it also helped them see what areas they were weak in or needed to have more practice in. It did give me more confidence, not only in a CBE design, but also we went back. After we developed this class, we went back and looked at the traditional class and we changed some things in there and we added the course learning objectives to those rubrics as well. And so we really felt like we understand now how courses are aligned with CBE principles.
Well, and I definitely feel like if I'm ever, I do have a couple of CBEs that I'm helping design now. I definitely know the process a lot better from a design standpoint and how Canvas can truly function for CBE to the best of its ability.
Yeah.
And that it can differentiate and look like a lot of different things depending on what the faculty and the class want to do.
Yeah. Do I think it's for every student? No.
Absolutely.
The students who were in this class had been in the field and have been practicing in the field for at least 5 years. So
Somebody asked if we surveyed the students, and we did. At each point and before and after the course, we had a holistic survey.
Yeah, and they did enjoy it. They liked the setup of it. They wished more classes were that way. But like I said, these were students who've already been practicing in the field. They already have jobs in the field. And so they have more knowledge than other students. And they just wanted, in hindsight, they want to do dates.
Someone asked us, let's see, let me pull it up here. Do you think it's better for graduate versus undergraduate? I think it just depends on the nature of the course. There's some courses and the student and all of that. I'm gonna give the political answer. It depends. But I think some courses in the undergraduate world could fit very well for this. Again, if it's especially one where if you had a student that had outside career experience, maybe they're a non-traditional student coming into an undergrad program and they've done some career experience in this field and they have a lot of that foundational knowledge, but they need this for a requirement. That would give them the opportunity to be able to showcase that knowledge and move through the course at their own pace and a quick pace. So that would fit well. And it does require discipline for the student, and it does need to be a well-designed kind of concept if you're going to do the CBE. But I think grad classes, would be, I could see several instances.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody is on here from English, but Gil, have you heard how they did revamp English 101 into a CBE class? And
I have not heard how it has gone, but I know they decided not to do 102.
Okay.
They thought the process of that outweighed the competency.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody on there heard me, but yeah.
So, so I think
it does truly depend on the nature of the course and if it could be. I know when I taught K-12, we did standards-based grading. Some courses fit really, really nicely into that, and some you had to be a little, creative on how that would fit too. So, does anybody have any other questions? I will mention the QR code there, and we'll be glad to send out an email to participants too. It's a one-pager resource that kind of highlights our process, some of the tools that we utilized along the way, and maybe the mindset you would have as a designer and faculty as you're looking at doing a CBE course, using that backwards design kind of concept. So that hopefully the QR code works. If it doesn't, we will send an email out to everybody as well.
All right, our final slide is.
Oh, it's going to start at the beginning. Hold on, let me hush in there and get to it.
Oh, wait.
Here we go.
We're gonna.
Oh, poo.
Well, that's Mozart celebrating, and there's celebration song by Fully.
Oh, the feedback's not gonna let us do it.
I'll send that out too for everybody, because that's fun. So, this was, again, just an example of the engagement piece. Got my undergrad at EKU and graduate, so I wanted to, some of that EKU lore was sprinkled throughout, so that's Mozart, and that was the end celebration dance for the students. So yeah, we'll be glad to send out a little snippet of the video so you can see some of the engagement pieces, that we sprinkled throughout too.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. And
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on if
Same.
anybody has any other questions or wants to see anything with the
sure, yeah,
class
we'll
or
be glad to
anything.
show. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, do you have any questions?
Are interested, it looked like that was the last one I think came up, but,
Yeah.
so we can, yeah, you can end it if you want, or do we have to end it up here?
I might have to end it up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, Mary, you're front and center.
I know.
Look.
Oh, gosh.
I'm glad I didn't see myself. I would have been like, ugh.